Okay, okay, guys, have you read the Diwan's chapter? Anyone? Just yes or no. I want to make sure that you hear me.
Which chapter, doctor?
Diwan's one, the one on private sector in the age of uncertainty, assigned for this week.
Oh yes, the future of the private sector in uncertainty. Yeah, I've looked at it, but I haven't finished it yet.
Okay, yeah. So let me talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then if you have any thoughts, so perhaps I can fresh your mind.
Okay.
Okay, so we are still discussing the new regime that emerged in after 2013 moment, from 2014 until this year 2020. So how the regime has consolidated its authority, especially after 2014, and actually it keeps reproducing the same moment in order to legitimize its rule and its way of governance. So quick reminder about state society relation, because this is very important when it comes to the political settlement and social bargains. So the regime actually issued strict legal regulations and framework in order to repress the civil society, or to close off any kind of associational space and any space for to voice any kind of a challenge or opposing opinions. So in order to do that, it was the regime actually has deployed populist ideology by reference to national identity and national unity and national identity as well, in order to exclude the different actors from the civil society organizations, or to the civil society in a general term, the term we used in week 8. So they don't have any kind of say or political influence in decision-making process. They were totally excluded from the decision-making process. And the regime actually used anti-terror law in order to confiscate, or to have a legal foundation to confiscate the Brotherhood's assets, all the charitable and the organizations and networks that the Brotherhood members own. For Mubarak cronies as well, they are allowed, to run their own business or to have their market share, but they were totally as well excluded from political process and from decision-making process. They don't have any kind of say or any kind of political influence in policy making. And this actually. So what dominated the market or the economic domain? They are kind of army connected, and it's logical, because we mentioned last lecture something about how the new regime actually governs through the existing state institutions or state apparatuses, and especially the military and the security and intelligence agencies. So actually, these kind of associated firms and projects, they have become kind of the driver for economic growth, and actually controlled market transactions. So for the chapter here, Diwan talked about something about the political settlement, but this is political settlement from political economy perspective, or using political economy approach in order to form these kind of economic arrangements, or these political settlements between different elements in society and the state. So it actually, the approach highlights how civil society organizations and the private sector and the state actually interact and relate in order to come up with or to form kind of political settlements or kind of arrangements. And these settlements and arrangements are a function of two main factors. The first one is the level of contestation, to what extent the society would have like kind of social pressures and social demands in order to put on the national authority or to pressure, you know, the national authority, and then how the regime actually responds to these demands. So the regime might have like two different strategies: repression and like logically this strategy excludes, you know, any kind of social pressures and social demands and social groups, or concessions the regime might, you know, accept, and these kind of the regime might meet, you know, these demands through like inclusion and offering, you know, some space for civil society and business groups in order to influence the decision making or the allocation of resources and the level of public expenditure. Like one like common theme that actually continued that was like since Mubarak, and it has continued, you know, under El Sisi regime as well. It was like a total kind of distrust and fear of the existence of or the emergence of independent private sector as kind of empowered actor that might, you know, influence the policy making or the economic and development trajectory. So under Mubarak, if you are done with the readings, I mentioned something about crony capitalism and how, like, you know, politically connected firms and getting into, you know, or constructing kind of a relation between with the ruling elites or the ruling circle was very important in order to get your business done. Otherwise, as a business, you know, community, they would subject to intimidation or state predation. So like the like, you know, the main feature is still here. It's kind of a dominance of politics over economics or over private sector. And the political environment in 2013 and 2014, it actually gave rise, you know, to this control, and it has like, as we're gonna see, it has kind of implications for the growth and political and policies, like the development policies or the development strategies. So what happened in 2014 and before 2014, in 2013, that actually led to 2014. So it was like a renewal of this kind of autocratic bargain. What they meant, like, from this political economy approach. So the state actually, the society might have different social demands, and the regime responds, you know, to these demands, given, you know, the existing ruling coalition, or the social basis, you know, of the existing regime. It didn't, like, even before like 2014, it didn't respond by using or offering more concessions and more inclusionary policies. It actually excluded and repressed, you know, these demands. Because of the uprising at this critical juncture, it was like a total failure of establishing this broad-based reformist coalition that would take, you know, the social demands on board and accept, you know, some sort of participation of different like business groups and civil society. But he focuses mainly on business groups or business community. So actually, the economic decisions, or like any kind of development strategy, it's not like based on like market imperatives. It's not guided by, you know, these kind of market dynamics or market imperatives, or like, you know, in order to enhance productivity or to encourage, you know, innovation and like gaining, you know, different skills, like having like a stake in developing, you know, skills and having good supply in labor market. But actually it was like politically motivated in order to maintain political stability. So instead of having like this kind of inclusionary policies in order to enhance productivity and increase economic growth, they have like different different goals, which is mainly political stability, especially after, like, you know, relegating, these social and economic demands to the margin, and putting instead, or replacing this kind of identity politics and restoring stability and order instead. So there is like, by using this kind of repressive strategy and putting more even more restrictions, on in the entry of newcomers or new organizations, this would actually help, with the maintaining political stability, but it definitely has like, negative or like long-term effects, on economic growth, because it decreases actually the competition, and it precludes any kind of incentives, for innovation and enhancing or increasing productivity. And like, it depends on the choice, the point here, it depends on like, this kind of inherited or like historical structure, which is like, distrust and fear of independent private sector, and agency choices, the choices made at this critical juncture, which is like, like the priority was given to stability and order rather than social and economic demands. And he used like 2x2 table in order to offer like a typology of a state business relation. So here, based on like two main factors or criteria, so we have like this 2x2 matrix. So you have like depending the level of the social pressures and how the regime actually responds to these pressures or these social demands. So like here you have like, low social pressures and high exclusion. This is like, the typical example of the development state, development state, and he makes like he refers to South Korea. So here, like the development state, it basically it has like, like administrative capacity in order to guide, the private sector, or in order to like to offer, kind of guidance about sectors, where the private sector should put or invest money in these sectors in order to enhance productivity or to lead to export led growth. This like historically happened because of this kind of low level of social demands that became much easier for PARC regime, especially to suppress or to marginalize and to go ahead with the export enhanced productivity projects and export led growth. And you have like Russia. Here it's a high level of social demands or social pressures, but still like the regime opts for this repressive strategy and exclusionary politics, and this actually lead to like, private sector to have rent seeking behavior. Like you have to get connected, with the ruling circle or the political circle in order to secure your property rights. Otherwise, you will be like, subject to state predation. So there is no market logic here. It's completely like, infused in this kind of political structure or the power structure. So, and this actually, it has like a negative long-term impact on economic efficiency, while it might help with stabilizing the political system. And he referred to Ghana as well by like, he mentioned something about clientelistic competition because of these kind of electoral cycles. So political elites might need to like, to rely on these kind of clientelistic machine in order to buy votes or to maintain or to their grip on power. So this is like high political cost. And this would like increase, any kind of incentives for private sector to investment. This is not like a good environment for private sector to invest. And then Brazil, He mentioned something about inclusive growth, but this is like accurately like that was like especially under Lula da Silva, the Silva's reign from 2013 2011. So the point here, it's kind of the state like, or the regime actually did care about both, like the offering, you know, kind of incentives for investment by like investment facilities and more investment to for economic growth, while at the same time the regime did care about, you know, poverty and income distribution, and it did offer, you know, welfare coverage and expanded, you know, the social safety nets. So like basically like political competition, it has kind of caused because of like the regime change and the probability of losing, you know, the elections, but at the same time taking, you know, or responding to social demands and offering, you know, more inclusionary politics was sustainable, and it was like conditional or contingent on securing, you know, a high level or sustainable level of economic growth, and that didn't happen, you know, after under the rule of Dilma Rousseff. And the Labour Party actually got engaged in some financial scandals and piping and in funding and financing electoral campaigns. How like Egypt would fit into like these kind of four categories? He put it like he put Egypt under like, you know, the low side, the low social pressures and hard repression and exclusion. And this is actually like, you know, proto like development state, but I'm not sure if it actually like it perfectly fits into, you know, this category, but it certainly repressed, you know, there is no kind of increasing social pressures. The regime actually managed to suppress like all potential, you know, social any kind of a challenge that would come from different social forces. But as well, like, you know, with regard to the capacity or the administrative and bureaucratic capacity and institutional capacity of the state in order to offer, you know, kind of guidance and to use like rent seeking effectively and efficiently for economic reason, we need to investigate, you know, the allocation of resources and what type of projects, like, you know, the new administrative capital, for example, or the South Canal project. So we need to know how, to what extent, you know, these kind of project would, like, you know, fall into, you know, this category of productivity enhancing projects, and would encourage, you know, would increase the productivity and enhance or sustain economic long-term economic growth. But certainly, like the main features like that actually we mentioned under Mubarak, it's still, like, you know, persists under El Sisi's regime as well. So, and the main features actually they have been like extended into 2014 until today. So we mentioned something about, like, you know, this kind of segmented capitalism with this kind of dualistic structure between insiders and outsiders, how the regime actually would offer kind of preferential treatment to politically connected and now, like, you know, the military or the army connected firms, that they are kind of loyal and they don't represent any kind of threat or they are not, like, you know, politically threatening, you know, the existing or the stability of the regime. And the main feature as well, it's weak private sector, so they don't have like this initiative like capacity. They don't have like strong incentive to invest in R&D or to skills and training programs in order to offer like good supply in labor market. They have already, like, you know, the connected firms, or the like getting like connected and associated with the current regime would actually enable enable them to have like market share without bothering to like to invest in innovation or R&D. So the regime actually remolding, you know, this kind of old cronyism or crony capitalism into like a new form, and even like, you know, narrower social basis or social coalitions by depending mainly on the state institutions and basically the military. So depend like this actually like reproduced, you know, the old system of privileges, and but like this time like around, you know, new circle of loyal cronies, just changing faces. And the army actually now is managing managing them and keeping them in check as well, with these kind of again like the populist discourse that actually emphasizes, you know, this or appeals, you know, to nationalism and identity, regardless of like, you know, the economic outcomes or the economic policies. So like the regime actually keeps reproducing, you know, the 2013 moment, the base of legitimacy. And there is kind of you can like, you know, have a look at the speeches, but I opted for like, you know, two in order to show how like the regime repeatedly like makes reference to this phobia of a state collapse. It was mainly like, here you have it's a repeated reference, like everyone should have like these fears, you know, of a state collapse in order to legitimize, you know, these security and stability demands. And then this by definition would marginalize or relegate, you know, these social and economic rights or any kind of demands for social and economic rights, you know, to the margin. This kind of depoliticization actually enabled the regime to implement, you know, harsh economic policies and austerity policies, but with kind of rhetorical reference to these social and economic rights in the face or like political and human rights. And this actually affected, as I mentioned, like the economic arrangements, like how to which firms, you know, can be included and which firms, you know, are excluded, or the regime like, you know, puts more restrictions on their entry. And then there is no room here for like class alliance or from like as Nasser did, for example, like by incorporating, you know, popular sectors, especially labor, or even like, you know, the middle class. So here, like in 2017, it was like, you know, in one of Sisi's speeches, actually, he mentioned something about like these kind of international calls for respect, you know, for human rights. So he mentioned he actually placed priority to like, you know, education and health and employment. Like this is what, like, you know, these demands are like the ones that Egyptians, you know, should care about or should ask for, instead of like, you know, political rights or human rights, because like human rights are not reducible to in his words is not reducible to political rights only. Like you have to ask about like good education and like a good healthcare system and employment, good employment in Egypt as well. These are like, you know, the challenges like Egyptians, you know, should care about or get worried about. And then like, you know, in like this kind of like war on terrorism and this kind of populist and identity politics, it actually it has dragged on. And even in 2018 in his speech, you know, on Workers' Day, it was like 2 days before 1st of May, like the crowds actually cheered him. And like one of the demands actually, or like the sentences they made, it's here like, you know, we are with you and we are telling you go with God and fight, and we are like, you know, fighters with you. We will kind of remain fighters with you. So it remains like, you know, the moment, you know, are being reproduced, and this is the like giving like a priority to like security and order and this kind of like purging or like, eliminating, terrorist elements, or purging the country of the terrorist elements, it keeps like, it was being, or it has like, it's being reproduced, and this actually marginalized any kind of like social and political demands, given the depoliticization and given, this official discourse. And then we're going to have your presentations, but let's have like 5 or 7 minutes like discussion about that. Any thought about that?
I had sort of 2 questions.
Okay, it's okay. Yeah, I meant like to have a discussion, but if you have a question first, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One is about the Diwan reading. So I still haven't finished it, and so I hadn't seen the second table yet that you put on all the slides. But now I'm slightly confused, because is it that he has Egypt in a similar category as South Korea? Because in the first table, South Korea is also categorized as kind of a development state. And so is there a similarity there, or?
Yeah, when it comes to like, the like, that's the thing, like that's why like I mentioned, I doubt that it perfectly fits into this. Like the only similarity is kind of suppression, or repression of these social demands. Like this is like low level of social pressures that it's very like, much easier for the regime to this is regardless of like South Korea, like the developmental state, generally speaking. But the thing is like, the main like, they have like, this kind of bureaucratic and administrative capacity in order to offer guidance, to domestic private sector, where to invest in. Like, for example, like here, heavy, industries, all the investors, would target at, these sectors in order to invest, or to put their money into these sectors based on like the state's instructions and regulations. You see what I mean? So it's mainly like, like economic decisions, not like political ones.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's why, but the chapter actually is not, it's not about Egypt, it's like, it's a quick reference, to Egypt, but it kind of, it makes sense. Like, he talks about the post settlements, after the uprisings. So that's why, like, perhaps like to my knowledge, this is like the only thing, like, tries, to offer, kind of theorization, to state-society relation, and here like even like, a specific focus on state-business relations. Okay. But of course, like, if we have like, something, that would investigate Egypt in depth, we might have like, some other thoughts. But it's still like, it's still like this kind of exclusion and repression and like remolding, the old or renewal, this kind of autocratic bargain and this kind of narrow coalitions and the failure of establishing like broad-based reformist coalition after the ousting of, or after the removal of Mubarak. It's still it resonates, Mm. Any more thoughts? Okay, so let's start with your presentations, guys. So who is gonna start?
It's me.
Who? Salma? Okay, yeah. You need to share screen or something?
No.
Okay.
Do I start?
Yeah.
Okay, so my final paper's topic is about the involvement of the ultras group in the Egyptian politics post the 2011 revolution. The research
Salma, can you please speak up? Raise your voice. Yeah.
Okay, the research question I chose is, why did the ultras become prominent political actors post the 2011 revolution, and how did they affect the political arena? I mainly relied on secondary sources that included qualitative data as interviews with the Ultras member and so. The political processes model of contentious politics is proposed as a framework to analyze collective action through the interactions of the relationship between the Ultras and the state institutions that impacted the nature of the group's political engagement since their inception and following the January 25th, 2011 revolution. Throughout my paper, I aim to examine how the Ultras youth of both clubs, Al Ahly and Zamalek, became eminent players of what they call Ultras politics. I started by delving into their initial involvement in politics, which was marked by the revolution. The ramifications of their participation in the revolution was specifically planned for protecting the protesters against police violence, as opposed to what's circulated among the population. They weren't one of the main thrusts of the movement. They were only responding to the request of other social movements as the Kifaya and 6th of April movements, as they thought the Ultras were the perfect candidates for such a task, given their usual clashes with the police during the football matches, which portrayed that they were viewed as an equally brutal opponent for the police forces. But they kept emphasizing that they didn't belong to any political party by posting that on their different social media platforms. But they had significant roles in breaking down the riot police in Mawqat al-Gamal and the Battle of Muhammad Mahmoud. And both incidents changed them from being the stadium hooligans to national heroes, which of course they thought came at a cost. According to numerous interviews conducted with members of Ultras Ahlawi and Ultras White Knights, the events of February 2013, where 74 Ultras Ahlawi members were killed in Port Said, the members interviewed believed that because of their role in 2011 revolution, they were seen as a threat to the system, and they thought that's why they kept getting arrested, beaten up, and killed. Which turned them against the government. So, building on Charles Tilley's framework of political contention and repertoires, it is demonstrated that the global disobedient shared identity of the Ultras group has naturally placed them as opponents to state actors and institutions with contentious mechanisms and repertoires that have largely changed since the 2011 revolution. And then the conflict between the police and the Ultras, which was hardly viewed as a political one in the beginning, became increasingly politicized after the events of January 25th. So consequently, the Ultras groups changed the mechanisms. I'm repeating that. The mechanisms and repertoires of their contention. So they chose to go against the state's securities apparatus, and they openly spoke up about the national issues and concerns inside and outside the stadium, including freedom, social justice, corruption, and state repression. It was also argued that with a changing political opportunity structure, which emulates the structure present during the Mubarak regime with the resolution of the Port Said massacre and convicting its perpetrators, the Ultras have withdrawn from the political scene and reverted back to their national scenes, although later on, the Court of Appeals ruled for their disbandment and they were categorized as terrorist groups. And that ruling was supposed to further impact the group's collective mobilization and engagement.
Okay, so the question was how they got initially politicized, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so briefly how they got politicized.
But in the beginning, they when they joined, when they chose to participate in the revolution, they thought they were seen as their role was seen as a threat to the system, and that's why the events of 2013 happened. So that's what they thought, I think. Yeah.
Okay, any questions to Salma, guys? Okay, thanks, Salma. Who's next?
Me, doctor. I'm next.
Sif?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
My topic is about the Sadat's Infitah policy. My question is basically what was the purpose of the Infitah policy and how did it affect the social and economical foundations of Egyptian society? First, I want to begin before saying out my argument, my center argument. I want to say my thesis statement. My thesis statement is that the Infitah policy was done due to domestic and foreign pressures, and the liberalization had a negative impact on the economic and social foundation that would shape the makeup of the society. My center argument is based on three aspects. First aspect is that I wanted to look at the Infitah policies and plans specifically to see why the policy was created and pushed by Sadat, in addition to the content behind the policy and what the Sadat wanted to do in the policy itself. I also found that the Infitah was the result of economic crisis in Egypt that was happening because of the high spending, especially on the military ones, due to the fact of the rebuilding military from 1967. I also found that the Infitah wanted to liberalize the economy and privatize to attract foreign investment as a way for Sadat to appease the US as part of the foreign policy. Last but not least, in the first aspect, I wanted first to get some source to explain some laws regarding these policies that I found in my sources. There are two laws that I have discussed in my research paper. Sorry, my term paper. The first law is law number 43. And it's basically it states that provisions against nationalization and confiscation tax exemptions from 5 to 10 years. Another important law is law number 97, which is the foreign exchange law, that provided the liberalization of foreign exchange transactions outside of Egypt, restructuring of public sector to abolish public organization for private ones, in addition to adopting free market policies. The result of these laws in the Infitah policy, I looked at it in the second aspect, which is basically the economic one. Moving on to the second aspect about the economic effects of the policy, I looked at journal articles and book chapters. I found that there is a huge difference between the micro level and the macro level of the economy. First, I want to begin with the macro level. Basically, in the macro level, I have seen that the GDP had grown and the deficit in goods has been decreasing. In addition to the liberalization brought back bourgeoisie businessmen and entrepreneurs into higher income levels into the society, while the private sector was also growing. On the other hand, looking at the micro level, I found out that the policy has been benefiting only the wealth and those with higher incomes, but those with lower incomes were suffering with extremely high prices and static low wages. And the non-industrial sector, which were most notably the agricultural sector, which was already struggling and receiving food aid, did not receive good funding or investment. Finally, talking about the social aspect, the economic liberalization brought back the elites and bourgeoisie to the top level of the society, where they were enjoying privileges and engaging in corruption without repercussions. That, in addition to the rest of the population, did not enjoy any kind of these privileges. Only the only the elites who had enjoyed these privileges. And this led the Islamists, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, to return to influence in society by benefiting from the liberalization economically and socially, while criticizing the government for the policies that were harming the poor. At the end, I want to summarize my argument. I believe that the Infitah was a way for Sadat to deal with the issues of the regime, especially the economic ones, and the result is that Infitah policy had transformed Egypt from a struggling self-sufficient state to a struggling neoliberal state dependent, especially on foreign aid, and ignoring the majority of the people, a situation that basically continues still today. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, can you you mentioned something about, you talking about like Infitah under Sadat, or like the implications, like, you know, that actually contained in the policy implications for like the society at large, generally speaking?
Yes, Doctor. I'm talking about the Infitah. It's under the Sadat, and this is as a result for the economic crisis that had happened.
Yeah, guys, any thought on that?
Thoughts on what exactly?
Yeah, like what he mentioned. Okay, so I have like two minor questions. Like you mentioned something about the implementation of Infitah policies as a result of both like domestic and international pressures. So I need, like, you know, more elaboration on this international, quickly, like international pressures, and like the role of Islamist, like re-engineering societies. I mean, like, there's kind of resurgence, you know, of like this kind of Islamic revival or Islamic sahwa. It did happen, you know, in the 70s, but when it comes to, like, you know, charity and like these kind of Islamic associations or jam'iyat, it was like, you know, kind of proliferation, but that was not like during the 70s, you know, after, like, you know, the 76, it was actually during the 80s.
Okay, Doctor. Basically, as I told you, that the Islamists that have risen up due to that they found out that only elites have taken only the rights, and these policies had affected the poor people. So this is something that they didn't like. So
but the main focus,
why,
the main focus was, like, you know, political, like it had like political content.
No,
it's
the
about
political.
like,
I understand the political content.
And because of like the peace treaty with Israel, so that was, like, you know, the recurring kind of themes they focused on. But anyway, it did re-engineer, you know, society, but it took, like, you know, some time in order to get, you know, this kind of re-engineering, not right after,
Okay.
you know, the implementation.
Doctor, I have one last remark. Is that the foreign policy that was used? Was basically that Sadat want to expel the Soviets from Egypt and ally with the U.S. to improve his chance of negotiations, especially after 1973. This is regarding the political aspect one.
Okay. Thanks, Saif.
You're welcome, Doctor.
Who's next?
Me, Dr. Suhaila, but I want to share the screen.
To share? Okay, yeah. Yeah, you can go ahead.
My research question is, to what extent did the President Gamal Abdel Nasser use political propaganda to infiltrate his ideology? First, I analyzed the ideology and types of media, but I concentrate on the role of the radio and the history of the radio and how Abdel Nasser depended on the voice of the Arabs as first, I want to mention that radio was at that time is very important to people because it was cheap and available, and there wasn't the main channel, the Voice of the Arabs, that broadcast the news, the speeches of Abdel Nasser. Also, I want to I analyzed some of his speeches, Abdel Nasser. I analyzed his language. Usually when he talked to the Egyptians, he talks in colloquial language, not formally, and sometimes he started to insult the Western, like in one of his speeches, like he said they insult me, and they said that I am ان انا كلب، لا ده هم الولاد 60 كلب ومش عارفه ايه. he insulted them in the public. Also Abdel Nasser asked the local producers to produce songs that increase nationality, and the two prominent stars was Kulthum and Abdel Halim Hafiz. They have songs that mobilize people, some to his ideology, like to Palestine, and others fight in the war. One of the Kulthum songs after the great loss in 1976, the song of Ibqa, after the great loss of Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he is the only one who should be responsible for this loss. Even if this Kulthum have a song Ibqa for him, and also Abdel Halim Hafiz, who have songs for to Gamal Abdel Nasser and asking people to go and fight. And one of the opposers of Abdel Halim of Gamal Abdel Nasser was Ahmed Fuad Nigm, who have a poetry that he published it after the loss in 1976. It's called Alhamdulillah خبطنا تحت بطاطنا. And after he published this quote, Gamal Abdel Nasser put him in the prison, and he swore that he will not get out of the prison until his death. And this happened. Ahmed Fuad Nigm stayed in the prison until Gamal Abdel Nasser this in 1970s. My conclusion is that Gamal Abdel Nasser used the political propaganda, and he make the whole society sees what the only thing that Abdel Nasser sees and what he wants and his ideologies. Also, I have a short video, on 1 minute video, about Saad Muhammad al-Shazli, Hussein al-Shazli, and he called Saad al-Din al-Shazli. He is an Egyptian military commander. He was talking about the Yemen war, and he says that they was the politician who make people see only what the only one who should be penalized for the war in Yemen was the politician who made all people be sure that this is the right thing. I want to share with you the video.
هل كان واضح إذا عدوك وهناك قوة رجعية أو غيرها من المسميات التي كانت تطلق على القوى الموجودة في اليمن، هل تبدأ بالعدو المباشر أم تبدأ بالعدو الفرعي؟ قلت لك الخطأ إنك أنت تفتح في جبهتين، ما فيش شك، إنما هذا الخطأ يسأل عنه الذين خططوا والذين يعني حاولوا عملية غسيل مخ للقيادات القوات المسلحة وللشعب المصري، بحيث أنه أصبح مقتنع تماما بأن حرب اليمن، وحرب اليمن أنا عايز أقول لك هنلاقي رأي فيها. حرب اليمن إذا استبعدنا أنها جاءت في وقت أرغمنا فيه على المواجهة مع إسرائيل، كانت هتكون مفيدة في للاستراتيجية العربية، إنما هو الخطأ إن في التوقيت.
That's it for my presentation, but I want to insist that Abdel Nasser regime like make a brainwash for the people to the extent they didn't see anything except what Abdel Nasser see.
So can you please say the question again, Sohaila?
Yes. To what extent did the president Gamal Abdel Nasser use political propaganda to infiltrate his ideology?
Okay. So do you have like, did you analyze, some of the songs or some of the
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to make sure like in the paper, like, you elaborated on like,
Yes,
how he infiltrated, this ideology.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us like, like repeated themes or like, common repeatedly used words or something?
Words? What do you mean by repeated words?
Like, I mean, like you analyzed the propaganda in what sense? Like the songs like that actually it played into, this nationalist sentiments or did awaken, this kind of nationalism or only, or what other, like, what other elements, of his ideology?
For Abdel Halim Hafiz, there are, but after I concentrated in Abdel Halim Hafiz after the period of from 1976 to 1970, because there is a great loss that the only one should be
67, right?
Sorry, 67. The only one who should be responsible is Gamal Abdel Nasser. However, there is 8 songs or maybe more for Abdel Halim Hafiz who asking people to fight like بالدم اضرب. And other songs, I analyzed these 2 songs, and Kulthum have a song called راجعين بقوة السلاح.
Okay, so it was like after the defeat, June defeat, right?
Yes.
That was your moment, that you focused on.
Yes.
Okay.
Because this is what Gamal Abdel Nasser should be more responsible for what has happened in the war, and even if this Kulthum, many singers have songs to ask him to stay in power.
Okay. Okay, who's next, guys?
I'm next.
Who is talking? Because I can't see.
Yara.
Yara, can you stop like Sohaila, can you stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how far I'm gonna leave the meeting and
rejoin. Okay, yeah. Yara, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I don't have a presentation. I will just say. Okay, so my question is, the state dominate the ideology of Al-Azhar and shape its propagations. The methodology I used journals and books, but I also like had to use.
So the time period, your time period. Did you focus like?
Yeah, I focused on a specific time period. Yes.
When?
I talked about the under Nasser and Sadat historically, but I also spoke about Sisi.
Okay.
So yeah, and I also used speeches that were made by the Mufti, Sheikh Al-Azhar, and the presidents. How I organized the essay, I used the first paragraph for the historical period. I spoke about the changes that happened during Nasser and Sadat because I found them to be important to understand the general context of how they're functioning today. And then I used the second paragraph, which was the bigger paragraph, for how it is right now under Sisi. I used the first paragraph to introduce the most important religious institutions in Egypt, and described what each one of them does, which were the Ministry of Awqaf, Dar al-Ifta, and Al-Azhar, and how the three are interlinked. I also I focused on these three historical on Nasser, as I said, and Sadat and Sisi, and I also you are using Al-Azhar or use Al-Azhar for their own political agenda. And the difficulties I faced, that it was very, very dense. It had a lot of historical content. I didn't have enough background about it, so it took me a lot of time to research. It took me a good time to understand because I found the relationship to be very complex. That's it.
Okay, like in a couple of sentences, how would you describe, this kind of relationship between Al-Azhar and the state under Nasser and Sadat?
Okay, so what I understood that Al-Azhar before Nasser, it wasn't under the state control, but Nasser, the Nasser had it in 1961. He brought it under state control, and he started using it for his own sake, like his own political agenda. Where, for example, he made Al-Azhar not come in his way of his ideology of Arab socialism, and he also used to make Al-Azhar promote national independence. And what he wanted. Under Sadat, it loosened up a bit the state control over Al-Azhar, but it still really controlled it, and he still made it function to promote his political agenda, where it started he started forcing Al-Azhar to be against the leftists and Arab socialism, because he used to crack them down.
Okay, and why? How did you justify leaving out Mubarak's era?
So after I wrote Gamal Abdel Nasser, first of all, I found Gamal Abdel Nasser and Sadat much more important, because when I read about them, I just felt to understand right now I have to, because Gamal Abdel Nasser is the one who had it under state control.
Okay.
And then Sadat carried on.
I mean, it would, it's to do this systematic analysis, so it would be okay to focus on Nasser and Sadat, but to extend that to El-Sisi as well, while leaving out Mubarak, like 30-year period in between. How methodologically you would justify this?
In my plan it was Nasser, Sadat, and Mubarak, and then I will talk about Sisi. But then after the paragraph I wrote for Nasser and Sadat, and just explaining things not in very much details, but just I just found that the essay, there's just no way to fit the three of them and Sisi. The three of them and Sisi, it was 3,200 words. So I found if I put Mubarak, it's gonna be huge.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, guys, do you have any question? Okay, thanks, Kiara. Who's next?
Doctor.
Yasmin? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so my term paper was about how and why did the British maintain their authority in the early years of their occupation in Egypt. It mainly focused on the 19th century and the last decades, but a large part of the paper focused on giving background information about how they sort of consolidated their power throughout the century. So my paper focused the lens through a colonialist framework to critique the history, and I started off by discussing how the Muhammad Ali dynasty kind of was a playground for imperialist ventures, because the nation lacked an organized structure and adequate funding, and lack of will of the people. And in analyzing the perspective of the colonizers, I came to realize how the British exactly rooted their way into Egyptian society through the schools, the lands, the army, and This all kind of started with one project. From my findings, I found that it can all be summarized in the Suez Canal, because the Suez Canal kind of offered the British a kind of shortcut to India, and it cut their travel time and served their trade interests. So the biggest reason for British involvement in Egypt was because of the Suez Canal. Another reason for them being able to consolidate their power was because of the Khedivi. So basically the Khedivi had sort of reached a state of bankruptcy, and they required help from the British and the French in terms of financial dependency, and that's why they established the dual financial control. And this kind of paved the way for the British to have further involvement in Egypt. And it sort of didn't just become about the Suez Canal anymore and the economic reforms. It started to be about how to permeate Egyptian society through different reforms other than financial dependency. And those involved schooling and the army and appointing powerful figureheads like Lord Cromer, rather than sending their armies and annexing the state. So the rest of the paper talks about the exact ways they restructured society in terms of how they rebuilt the streets and how they reorganized schools. And I gave a lot of background information about Muhammad Ali and his intention of militarizing society through the Lancaster method of schooling and the Egyptian school in Paris. And through my research, I found that drawing parallels with the research and findings of Michel Foucault and Timothy Mitchell helped me draw parallels and understand what was going on in Egypt at the time, because they explained the concept of organized suppression through the framework of schools and armies. And I found that very similar to what was going on in Egypt. So, like, for example, the theories of Foucault maintained how power and control over the minds of people was a much more effective way of conquering them as opposed to force, because the British never sent troops and annexed the state. They just sent Cromer or figureheads who would like negotiate or maintain control there, because they never had any need to consolidate their power through the army. So, and this was very relevant in my opinion, because the Muhammad Ali dynasty sort of bred a new generation of critical thinkers, and those critical thinkers, from our readings and from what we've learned in class, sort of became the nationalist leaders that posed a threat to the social order later on, and they sparked nationalist sentiments, and this was very threatening to society and the government. So the relevance that both Foucault and Mitchell hold over the topic of British occupation is that they both highlighted the methodology of colonizing a society from the inside as opposed to war or conquest. So yeah, that was pretty much it. And I just talked about how they, through this methodology, they sort of established themselves as the de facto rulers of Egypt, and how it's quite ironic because in trying to modernize the society and civilize it and educate it, they kind of paved the way for their own downfall, because it ended up making them want to go back to their roots and call for the revival of their traditions. And that was my central argument.
So Yasmin, do you want to say that like the British colonial authority, they had, kind of plan, like educational strategy or educational plan to to colonize, minds?
Yeah. In a way, yes. In a way, they have, I would kind of argue that they had already been establishing that way before occupation through the Lancaster method of schooling and other Western and European styles that Muhammad Ali had kind of taken from Europe and the West and started to integrate into schooling. They just built on what was already there.
Guys, any comment on this? Hello.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Yasmin, to be honest, if this statement is like, you know, accurate and it really captured, you know, what had been going on during that period. It was like, you know, kind of European, like Westernization and this kind of policies of modernization, but I'm not sure if you like it created, you know, kind of class, you know, that is like, you know, Western oriented and like, you know, based on like, you know, this kind of Western oriented education. But for like the rest of like, you know, the Egyptian people, like the vast majority, you know, were peasants, and the national elites, you know, that actually they came from Wafd and landowners. They had like these kind of nationalist sentiments, so they developed, you know, this kind of resistance against the British authority. And generally speaking, like, you know, they didn't care much, like the British actually didn't care much. It's not like, you know, if you compare, you know, the British colonial authority to the French one, for example, they didn't care much about, you know, this kind of assimilation and getting into, you know, or having control over people's minds.
In terms of the lower class people, I kind of argued Bordo in a part in the paper about how they weren't just, obviously not everyone had access to education, so we would appeal to them through Islamic solidarity and the teachings of Muhammad Abdu and Afghani and the way we learned about in class. And
some of the middle class as well, they got like, you know, attracted, you know, to these kind of ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, and the ideas behind Foucault and Mitchell, they're all just theoretical frameworks to try to explain what was going on at the time. I'm not like claiming this is exactly what they were doing.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Yasmin. Who's next?
Yes, Dr. Mustafa Bushmak.
Mustafa? Okay.
I will share screen, okay?
Okay. And Mustafa, speak up. I can't hear you.
Doctor, can you hear me clear?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, Doctor, I will talk about Mubarak consolidation of power in 30 years ruling. The paper starts with an introduction giving an overview of Mubarak rule in Egypt. Secondly, focusing on how Mubarak used different methods in parliamentary elections to consolidate more power, dealing with all opposition. Thirdly, focusing on the changes of Mubarak's relation with the Muslim Brotherhood, as they were the most significant opposition in his era. Fourthly, showing repression and marginalization against youth, and finally the conclusion. From 1981 to 2011, Mubarak had a management challenge to sustain his era for 3 decades, ruling a country as large and diverse as Egypt. Each decade has its own policies implemented by Mubarak to adapt with the status quo and at the same time consolidate power. He used different tactics dealing with opposition. The first decade showed a somehow containment of opposition, while the following decades showed different methods used to oppress opposition and youth to consolidate more power. Definitely, there were different sectors used by Mubarak to sustain his role for 30 years. However, the main aim of the paper is to show the different methods used by his regime to consolidate power in terms of 2 specific sectors, which are dealing with opposition, mainly the Muslim Brotherhood, through the 3 decades of ruling, and the marginalizing methods used against political youth in his last decade. To begin with, the existence of electoral competition in a country like Egypt provides a paradox, as it is combined with a non-competitive multi-party system. However, elections provide information for the regime of supporters and opponents. Also, elections help Mubarak regime to examine the loyalty of either bureaucratic officials and party cadres. In the 1980s, which was claimed to be the most democratic period in Mubarak era, as the opposition parties experienced the strongest electoral success against the National Democratic Party in all the electoral elections. The 1984, in 1984, the electoral law changed, making it under proportional representation based on a party lists, where 8% of voting were a must to get seats in the parliament, and if not, those votes will turn to the winner party, which by fact is the National Democratic Party. However, the electoral change favored the opposition parties, and the opposition representation in the parliament rose to 13% in 1984 and to 21% in 1987 elections. However, afterwards, the Supreme Constitutional Court, it changed the electoral law, ending the list system, claiming that it does not offer space for individual candidates. And in 1990, the law of 8% was dismissed, as it showed that opposition parties unite as Muslim Brothers and WAFD formed an alliance in the elections. Otherwise, the regime insisted that the new law would make them instead counter each other's, and so benefiting the National Democratic Party with more seats. In response, the parliament passed an electoral law mixing both methods of individuals and lists together, resulting in 100 non-NDP candidates being elected, recording 20% of parliament elected seated. The WAFD won 36 seats. The Labour Party and the Brotherhood, running on a combined list, took 56 seats, and the opposition independents won 8 seats. Therefore, the first decade of Mubarak could be argued that it showed a containment of political opposition. However, the second decade showed the start of using extreme repression against the opposition and the domination of the National Democratic Party in the parliament. The 1995 elections were the most violent, where 87 people died and 1,500 were injured in different constituencies to intimidate opposition voters, resulted for opposition gaining only 13 seats, which is only a 3% of the parliament, with no inclusion of any Muslim Brotherhood member. Such repression and fraud methods used by the regime, relying on its security forces, sustained since the 1995 elections until 2010. For exception, the 2005 elections showed some inclusion of the Muslim Brothers due to international pressures on the regime, resulting in winning 88 seats by the Muslim Brotherhood. Also, the relation with the Muslim Brotherhood as the most significant and powerful opposition to the regime, the inclusion and exclusion process went far from the electoral arena, and the regime used the media as a complementary method. The regime used his own journals, El Musawwir, then followed by Rosal Youssef, for such purpose. It took 4 phases. I will explain each one. In the first phase, the regime offered a political inclusion for the Muslim Brotherhood. This was proved by the aforementioned success in the parliament elections. Also, leaving the arena for the brothers to enter the professional syndicates, and the media discourse used by the regime in that phase to include the brothers was based on setting apart the Muslim brothers from the violent Islamist groups like Jama'ah al-Islamiyya and the Jama'at al-Jihad. Also insisting that the Muslim brother activities were commended for being in the service of the Egyptian people. In the second phase, where the regime relations with the Muslim brothers started to change, the 1987 elections showed another success of the Muslim brothers, winning 37 seats, and so became the major threat to the regime. Therefore, the government discourse negatively shifted against the brothers to eliminate the organization growing public support. And this was based on a public discourse claiming that the Muslim Brotherhood is not distinct or different from the radical Islamists. Also claiming that the Muslim brothers are using the syndicates to coordinate and help the radical Islamists, as Jama'at al-Jihad, to throw Egypt into a wave of terrorism. In the third phase, it was the extreme of both reversal, inclusion of the group, and more negative discourse against. As I mentioned before, the 1995 elections showed no one of the Muslim brothers in the parliament. Also, the government excluded the Muslim brothers as many of the syndicates boards were frozen and imprisoned. The security services intervened in the student union elections and prevented the brothers from winning. Then the last phase of Mubarak era from 2002 to 2011 showed different events in the inclusion process due to international pressures of the US against the regime. The regime was somehow forced to lessen repression in 2005 elections. Therefore, 88 of the group members won seats. In response, the regime followed the discourse of claiming the Muslim Brotherhood as a criminal actor and an enemy of the country, referring to it in the public discourse as al-Jama'a al-Mahzura. In the 2000s, a new actor in the political arena took place, like the youth movements of Kifaya and Youth for Change. The government dealt with the same repression methods using the security forces to abort the protest of the youth. Also, restrictions were placed on membership in student unions. The restrictions were such that the student bylaw made the approval of such activities subject to the consent of security services. And apart from this approach, the regime in a general view, neglected focusing or supporting youth issues. Most of the laws addressing youth affairs were passed without taking the views of youth into account. For example, the laws concerning the exercise of political rights, which did not allow people under the age of 30 to run.
Mustafa, you have like 2 minutes to go. Can you please
I
sum
have
up?
only 2 slides.
Okay, yeah.
Returning back to the point, اللي هو the laws concerning the exercise of political rights, which did not allow people under the age of 30 to run for membership of legislative councils. In conclusion, the regime sustained his power for 30 years by dealing with opposition in different methods, starting from the first elections and the change of the electoral laws in different rounds to consolidate power, using containment and repression methods at the same time or in different times. Also, the relation with the Muslim Brotherhood took several aspects in 4 phases. And finally, the relation with the youth and neglecting youth demands was an element used by Mubarak in his last decade and turned to end his rule in 2011. And that's all.
Okay, thanks, Mustafa.
Okay, thank you.
You guys have any question? Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mustafa. Who's next? Guys, who is next?
Check on Blackboard, Dr. Farida or Joanna, either one of them. I think.
Okay. So we still have Farida, Joanna, and Rafiq, right?
And Rafiq, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, anyone guys, who's ready?
I am ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen.
Mm-hmm. Joanna or Farida, I think Rafiq left and he will join us.
I'm ready if
okay, yeah, go ahead, Joanna. Yeah, until he comes.
Okay, I'll just check screen. Can you see the screen?
Yeah. Maximize, yeah.
So
Rafiq, can you go after Joanna?
Yes. So
okay,
sorry,
yeah.
I don't know why it
no problem.
disconnected.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joanna. Yeah.
So my paper is about the Camp David Accords, and my research question is, how did the Camp David Accords impact Arab-Egyptian relations? So my paper was divided into 2 parts. The first part talks about Sadat's strategy and motives for making peace with Israel, basically why he decided to make peace. And the second part is talks about how this strategy that he implemented did impact Egypt's relations with the Arab world. So as the first part, as I mentioned, is basically about why he decided to negotiate and the context behind it. So the 1967 disastrous defeating and yes.
Okay, there was kind of an interruption. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
So did you hear the last thing I said?
No. So the context was like the June defeat, right?
Yeah, the 1967 defeat was the main event that sparked the need for negotiation because of the loss of the Sinai Peninsula for Egypt, but there was also Arab territory losses such as the West Bank, the Golan Heights, but what interests us is the Sinai Peninsula since we're talking about Sadat. And another important element to give context is that Sadat pursued a de-Nasserization process. There was a shift in regional policy from Nasser to Sadat. Nasser focused more on pan-Arabism, Arab unity, and leadership over the Arab world. However, Sadat was more interested in having closer relations with the West and especially the US. So as Sadat assumes power after Nasser's death, he acknowledges that regaining Sinai through military means and defeating the Israeli army is not an attainable task. And he also thought that war with Israel would only lead to unnecessary loss of human life, an economic crisis, and another potential defeat that could also cause another loss of national prestige, which Egypt could not afford. Sadat also understood that the US was a crucial actor and a crucial mediator in case he wanted to pursue peace with Israel, so he acknowledged that very well. To move on to my key arguments and findings, I argue that the Camp David Accords weakened Arab-Egyptian relations and that it constituted a blow to Arab unity and nationalism under Sadat's rule. So Sadat was seen by most Arab leaders that like he betrayed the most sacred Arab cause, which was the liberation of Palestine, and this cause was not seen possible without the leadership of Egypt. So the Arab world and Arab states also saw that peace with Israel and the Camp David Accords, they deviate from the Arab League framework, which means that like the treaty, the peace treaty or the Camp David Accords negotiations, they did not include a far-reaching approach to regional peacemaking, or they did not include a way to regain Arab territory back, such as the Golan Heights and the West Bank. Egypt did not take the Palestinian issue into consideration, which like these two elements were primary motives for the Arab League. So the Arab states decided to meet in a summit in Baghdad with Iraqi leadership in November 1978. 20 Arab states participated as well as the PLO. And in this summit, they reached the conclusion that they had to condemn the potential signing of a peace treaty with Israel. This was in 1978, and the peace treaty was signed in 1979, so it was a year before. And they also called upon Egypt to renounce the peace accords. To Arabs, Egypt making peace with Israel is a recognition of the legitimate Zionist state, and it was also an infringement of the right of the Palestinian people. Egypt also breached the 1967 Khartoum resolution by making peace with Israel or even negotiating, and this resolution stipulated the 3 no's, which are no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, and no negotiations with Israel. Another element that Arabs thought was betrayal on behalf of Egypt was the fact that there was a period of, there was a stage of maximum cooperation between Arabs and specifically between Egypt and Arabs in 1970 until 1973. In this period, there was an extensive financial aid from the Gulf states, and in addition to military support from Syria. So the Arabs saw this as a betrayal because the Gulf were financing Egypt and Syria was providing military support and into the same cause. However, Egypt turned all of that away and decided to make peace with Israel. So they felt like they were more betrayed because they assisted Egypt in the 1973 war. But according to Sadat, if peace with Israel would gain Sinai back and create closer ties with the US, Sadat was ready to sacrifice his relations with the Arab world. So what the Arabs did was that they implemented collective economic and political sanctions, which entailed a discontinuation of loans, deposits, financial and technical aid. They also imposed embargoes and stopped any form of economic aid funds from any Arab financial institution affiliated with Arab League. They also decided to dismiss any oil exports, any exports of oil product or any commercial exchanges with Egypt or any organization that potentially collaborates with Israel. There was also a ban on Egyptians working in Arab countries. There were approximately 1.5 million Egyptians living in Arab countries, and they would generally advantage the Egyptian economy with approximately $2 billion annually, which was a great hit to the Egyptian economy. Also, as a result of the negotiations, Egypt was excluded from the Arab League, and the new headquarters were relocated in Tunis. Arab states cut diplomatic ties with Egypt, and they shut down their embassies in Egypt as well. As I mentioned in the Baghdad summit in 1978, some agents wanted to meet with Sadat in order to discuss with him what happened in during the Baghdad summit. However, Sadat refused to meet them, and this further aggravated the situation. They thought that it was a diplomatic move, that Sadat was not interested in relations with the Arab world anymore. And therefore, the sanctions applied on the 31st of March 1979 from all Arab states except Oman, Somalia, and Sudan. So to conclude, the Camp David Accords led to Egypt's political and economic isolation from the Arab world. And this was until Mubarak came to power and tried to revitalize these relations with the Arab world. Sadat's interest was more of consolidating Egypt's interests rather than regional or Arab interests. And he wanted to, one of the things of the utmost importance to him was to create close ties with Israel, create close ties with the US. And if making peace with Israel would grant him this opportunity to make close ties with the US, he would definitely sacrifice Arab relations for that. As I mentioned, the denasserization, it shows the shift from Nasser's regional policies to Sadat's regional policy. And the Camp David's Accord, they led to a huge national discontent in Egypt, specifically from opponent of the regime, which led to Sadat paying a personal price on these peace negotiations, as he was assassinated in 1981, primarily because of people's discontent and the Muslim Brotherhood's content of him making peace with Israel. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay. You guys have any question on this presentation? Yeah, okay. I have like a tiny comment. You mentioned something about like, you know, that Sadat like initially he didn't reject, you know, the idea of like, you know, launching war with Israel in order to liberate and to reclaim lands. Okay, that was like because he had like, you know, like it's a common known like phrase, like, you know, what was taken by force would be returned, would be like returned only by force as well. And like after like 73, like in order to have like negotiation over Sinai, so that's why like he made like another statement like no more wars. So yeah, so he initially, just to legitimize, you know, his position as a president, he kept reminding, you know, people that, you know, he was going, you know, to have a war with Israel in order to liberate, you know, the lands.
Yeah, what I found, I also included that in my paper, but I didn't have time. Like
yeah, because yeah, you made like this like general statement, so that's why I just like needed to highlight. But if you wrote this in the paper, yeah, it would be like this is like the precise information.
I did, and I mentioned that he mainly engaged in war with Israel in 1973 to step foothold in the Suez Canal, so he could use this as a card.
As a leverage, yeah, in the negotiation, yeah. Okay, thanks. Rafiq?
I need to stop
yes.
sharing.
You need to stop, yeah, sharing, and then, yeah, to enable him. So you can share your screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it sharing right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question for the paper was, why did democratization fail in Egypt after 2011? And I look at three main entities that could represent factors that have helped answer this question of why democratization failed. Those three factors are the military, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the secular opposition. The intervention of the military and the security establishment is likely a major reason why the democratic transition did not successfully take place in post-Arab Spring Egypt. And I look at a couple of highlights of actions by the military that undermined the democratic experiment. So on this slide, I have summarized some of those interventions by the military. The first of those could be represented by the 30th of March Constitutional Declaration. This came after the first constitutional referendum on the Constitution in March of 2011. And it was interesting because even after the people had voiced their opinion and actually agreed to the amendments that the Constitutional Assembly appointed by the military had made to the Constitution, the military still actually went on and had their own constitutional declaration the 30th of March, which kind of ensured and embedded their own position of privilege and authority within the country. And in my paper, I specifically elaborate on what exactly were the amendments that furthered their control over the country, and was kind of a very early sign after the 2011 revolution, a sign of, you know, the military showing that they still intend to take control. Later incidents include the Maspero incident, which was kind of also a brutal crackdown on protesters and kind of echoed the same kind of repression that existed under the Mubarak regime, and further showed signs of the military intending to continue repression and undermine the democracy experiment. The Silmi document is also an interesting example where this was named after the deputy prime minister at the time, and it was by the end of 2011, where the military again issued a document which acted kind of as a constitutional declaration, also furthering their authority. This was actually later revoked after protests by the Muslim Brotherhood and other opposition groups. But I thought it also acted as evidence of the military's intentions since 2011 to try and maintain control and not to have the old regime completely collapse. In general, also the utilization of the judiciary to dissolve an elected parliament. And by in general, I mean the utilization of the judiciary was also another kind of apparatus by the military to maintain control. And specifically in 2012, they suddenly issued a decree which stated that the parliament was unconstitutional for reasons relating to just what it, how it was made up and what it consisted of regarding the party list and individual numbers of seats. But it meant to many and represented a kind of action by the military to dissolve a democratically elected parliament in a way because it was Islamist, and the military again showed its authority and control, which in this case went against a democratic parliament and represented in general the military's continued attempts of undermining the democratic experiment. This all sort of concluded by continuation of co-optation of the secular opposition, and in 2013 the military coup, which completely ended the democratic experiment. And so in the paper I delve into all of these events and tried to then argue that the military played a major role in why democratization failed in Egypt after 2011. I also talk about the Muslim Brotherhood. The MB monopolized power. They allied with the Supreme Council of Armed Forces the military during the early months of 2011, which was interesting because the military should have represented to many somewhat the old regime, and the MB, instead of kind of allying itself with the opposition and the revolutionary pro-democracy groups, they instead had kind of a pact with the ruling military. This pact later dissolved, but it was just a sign of the MB kind of somehow prioritizing their own interests above just trying to coordinate with other pro-democracy groups. Later in 2012, the MB had taken full control over the legislative, the executive branches of government, and effectively dominated the judiciary through President Morsi's 22nd of November 2012 Constitutional Declaration. So it was seen and argued by many that Morsi and the MB in general had appointed to most positions of authority within the government members loyal to the MB. And also specifically the 22nd of November declaration gave Morsi full authority over the judiciary and made his actions or decisions immune from judiciary oversight. And this was seen by many as an attempt to ensure that the constitution that was being written by a Islamist constitutional assembly would be protected from judiciary oversight, and again represented kind of Morsi sort of very much extending his executive powers, and would later become kind of a famous or infamous sign of Morsi potentially trying to become an autocratic leader. Although this may be actually exaggerated, because Morsi, after a lot of protests, revoked most of the declaration, although the constitutional referendum by the end of December did occur, and they got the sort of Islamist written constitution passed. But even though he revoked many of the things he wanted to pass in the constitutional declaration, it itself and at the time represented and gave legitimacy to this idea that Morsi or the MB were planning to just take full control of the country. And so I argue that these actions by the MB helped provide a foundation for and legitimacy to the 2013 military coup ending the democracy experiment. So although the military coup kind of just pulled the trigger and completely ended the democracy experiment, in a way the MB hurt their own interests by these actions, which gave legitimacy to the military coup. Finally, I look at the secular opposition. I argued that a strong opposition capable of challenging the ruling regime simply did not materialize, and this helped undermine a democratic Egypt. The secular opposition failed to remain a unified force that prioritizes democracy, and refuses to become a mere extension of an authoritarian state. Again, the military continued to kind of co-opt the opposition along with the MB, and would have these pacts where they would use the opposition to serve the interests of continued military control instead of the success of the democracy experiment. Also, one very important point, and in a way this is unique in my paper because I usually just focused on authors and political scientists when I think about this period between 2011 and 2013. But I also looked at two authors, Faith Moedini and Brian Detry, who wrote an interesting, or did interesting research, which was published in, I don't have the title of the journal in front of me, but they did surveys investigating the topic of public support for democracy in post-Mubarak Egypt. And their research findings basically showed through multiple surveys that Egyptians still until after 2011 did not see democracy as their sort of absolute priority. And even more importantly, so civilian control of the military ranked very low on priorities for the Egyptian people. And so basically what this research showed is that Egyptians did not prioritize democracy and really never saw civilian control of the military as an important and utmost priority. And this argument very much weakened the opposition, because in Egypt we never had an opposition that had a strong electoral base, which would help them challenge more the military and the ruling regime. So these are my sources. My question, which I mentioned to you, Professor, a couple of classes ago.
Yeah, the agency. Yeah.
Exactly. That this paper is kind of a more agency-oriented approach.
So what? I do remember. But what kind of a structural approach you mentioned here, like the military, right? Like focusing mainly on the military.
So I mean, so by a structural approach, I think what I meant was kind of factors that just exist in society that go beyond individual decisions. So basically, one structural, I guess, thing that I would say I mentioned in the paper is that
for the public support, right? You mean like by structural factor, like kind of perhaps like implicitly cultural one, right?
But possibly.
Yeah, but I mean, like it depends. Like like in 2011, it was like a very critical moment to reshape, this kind of public opinion, because like the movement was kind of multivocal, and they did ask for democracy, but perhaps like, they defined this only as like, removing, Mubarak as a head of the regime. So they didn't have like this kind of complex way of thinking, like, the military is still like, one of the integral part of the Mubarak's regime. It's not like, so they started like the army and the people are one hand, and then it was like in Muhammad Mahmoud like clashes, they started like, to chant against like, down with the military rule. So I mean, like it was like a period to reshape, these kind of public opinion. It's not like if you talk about like, the ordinary people. But I mean, like, if this is like the structural element you mentioned, if you meant like the military as well, like of course, like the very existence, of the military that actively like reshaped, the dynamics and the rules of the game, but actually they handed over power after all. And in 2011, so they had like, the like behind the scene, or like, actively reshaping, but they have like, like a government to run a country, caretaker. And in 2013, actually, they handed over power, and they just, they were interested in maintaining, the constitutional prerogatives and the privileges, they have had, and they got it, and they didn't actually intervene to remove Morsi without the popular support. So they needed, these kind of like the opposition and the popular support in order to step in and to remove the Morsi from power. So I mean, like it was about like a choice whether or not to accept the elections or the electoral result, and then to play from the opposition like position. It's not like to turn it upside down and to appeal to the army. For the Brotherhood, of course, they had a deal with the army or with the military, and they actually marginalized the opposition. So it's kind of the interaction between the three players that would account for. It was like a very critical point to make choices. So the choices made at this moment, it was like consequential for the entire regime. You know what I mean? So if
Yes.
there is no like media campaign for Tamarrud, in order to mobilize people or to get like this kind of petition. So from like from my like observations and interviews as well, like I mean, like it was like much easier at this point to reshape the public opinion. People actually changed like their opinions overnight. I talked to different people like like on Monday, and then on Wednesday I found them they had totally different opinion because of this kind of media you know what I mean? It was like very, very critical moment.
Yes.
And it was very difficult to have like someone, they had like solid principles, and upon these principles they had kind of action, or they acted on their own principles. So that's why I do believe like in agency choices at this kind of critical juncture kind of. And that's why it's critical juncture, because like any kind of agency choices, given like the structural constraints or like factors during that period, it had like a kind of path dependency. Like the choices made, it had like sequences for the entire shaping of the institutions.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So I answered your question, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rafiq. Yeah. Farida?
Yes, yeah. Should I start?
Yeah. So this is the last presentation, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So my research question was, to what extent was Nasser committed to implementing his notion of socialism, and how did his economic and social reforms based on this ideological orientation lead to the betterment of the Egyptian people? The aim of my paper was to see whether he truly abided by this notion of his own notion of socialism. And another question was whether he was able to effectively enhance the people's lives through his economic and social reforms. So a little bit of context, the three officers, they loosely drafted a 6-point program to direct their government immediately after the military coup. And due to the fact that they had no predetermined strategy for running the country, the council reacted to situations as they happened and as they arose. But 9 years later, Nasser re-evaluated his domestic policies and determined that Egypt's effective economic development needed the implementation of like a clear selected fundamentals of socialism. And that's why he introduced the National Charter in 1962 as a way to reorganize the country's political and economic structures. He worked on institutionalizing socialism by creating the Arab Socialist Union, which was a revolutionary organization which was over the years used by the government to rally mass opinion and support. So his economic and social policies, I started with he aimed to create social justice and end feudalism by fixating on eroding the power base of the Wafd and the old regime. So an economic reform that worked on that was the Agrarian Reform Law of 1952. Another measure of social equity that was aimed also at reducing the power of the old elites and the Wafd was laws on income distribution. I also argued that the law of land reform wasn't just aimed for economical reasons. It had a social impact because it aimed to enhance the general welfare of the Egyptian peasants, and as a result, educational and health services were upgraded under Nasser. Because of the profits he made from selling and renting the confiscated lands to the peasants. So the peasants themselves, now that they had income due to this reform of land redistribution, they had sufficient amounts of money to pay for their children's school tuition fees. And the increase in the students' numbers was also facilitated by the construction of new schools and the improvement of old ones. Nasser, he considered it very important that the youth develop necessary skills to become productive laborers. So he exempted them from paying the tuition fees, and he built new university campuses. And he also announced that a governmental job would be guaranteed to every university graduate. The healthcare sector also saw a lot of improvements. By 1965, there were 2.5 times as many doctors as in 1952, and many new hospitals have been built, and good progress generally towards covering the countryside, the rural side of the country, with a network of health centers was achieved. Also, housing plans for major cities across Egypt were introduced, and clean water was provided for many regions for the public. Okay, yeah, and also the nationalization of different projects and the constructions of other ones led to the enhancement of the welfare of the Egyptian people. So for him to help in constructing the high dam, he decided that the fees from foreign ships passing through the canal would go to the Egyptian government's direction and not the company's shareholders. And in order to deliver electricity for large areas within the country, he worked on he had the modernization plan, and he including within this plan, he also wanted to bring more than 1 million fadans into cultivation, but unfortunately the project did not yield the results he wanted exactly, because only 7 million kilowatts instead of 10 million were generated, and only 500,000 fadans instead of 1 million were available for farming. Also, the Aswan Dam offered a considerable number of Egyptians in better working conditions, and it enhanced their overall living standards. And this was proven in the increase in the growth rate of Egypt's GNP, as it reached more than 4%, which was a rate significantly higher than the average growth rate of the rest of the world, per World Bank statistics. I also said that up until 1970, the country's imports exceeded the exports by $22 million. And Nasser's reasoning for closing the gap was that the saved capital could be devoted to industrial expansion. And the increase in industrial exports to foreign markets have actually compensated for the fall. And the industrial corporations' profits were later utilized to redistribute wealth and offer capital for government projects. Also, the fact that the neighboring Arab countries employed people from Egypt had a lot of positive impact, where the government experienced the economic impact directly, because the government was actually paid by the Arab countries, so they can send Egyptian workers over. And it also increased the welfare of the people themselves, because more incomes were generated. So as for the question of whether he was actually committed to implementing his notion of socialism, I argued that he was not entirely committed to the notion. And he embraced his own notion of socialism for pragmatic motives, not out of loyalty to the ideology itself. And I found proof of this in like the government's decision to take over most of the country's enterprises and become the sole manager of all capital formation. So I argued that Nasser's economic policy, it leaned more towards a form of state capitalism rather than Marxist socialism. So it was a policy based on the necessity to gather money, not on the idea of class conflict or the betterment of people, really. I also argued that the agrarian reform laws were primarily used to weaken the privileged class, not necessarily improving the welfare of Egyptians. And Selma Botman also agreed, because she considered the land reform as a revolutionary tool used to combat the entrenched feudal class. And I also argued that the regime wasn't able to provide the proper civil society that they promised earlier on. And some of these policies had negative outcomes, and it increased the Egyptian foreign debt to the Soviet Union, which resulted in paving a way for the Soviet manipulation of Egypt. And it kind of forced Egypt to completely depend on the Soviet system. Another point, I think it's my final point, to prove Nasser's loose commitment to Arab socialism was that he was distracted by his fears of foreign affairs happening around him. So not necessarily fears, but the foreign affairs happening around them.
Yeah.
So yes, so one of them was the formation of the United Arab Republic, where Egypt and Syria merged as one nation. So that's an example of something he was distracted by. And another example that I provided was the war in Yemen, because he spent a lot of his energy and the Egyptians' money on dedicating the Egyptian forces to the rebels' cause, and he could have used all the time, energy, and money on the Egyptian people and on the country itself.
Okay, thanks, Farida. You guys, do you have any question? Okay, thank you. I don't have,
Okay.
Yeah, okay, guys. Thank you so much. So this is like the last lecture, and good luck with your final. And I would like to thank Yasmina, the TE, for her effort, throughout the semester. And I'll post some like instructions, today after you submit your bonus, in order not to confuse, with the, or to mix, things up. So I'm gonna post like, some instructions about the final, from like, you have to focus on like, week, from week 9, I think from week 8, until week 15. And I'm gonna like talk more about, the type of questions and the word limit as well. Okay, so good luck, guys, with your final, and thanks, Yasmina.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.